Fred, welcome to the show. I'm super excited about your book here in Better Than Destiny. And then you said practical science for creating the life you want about decision making. And you're the expert. You're a surgeon too, aren't you?
Yeah, so that's my what I call my day job, and then writing and consulting and coaching is my side gig, so to speak. Although it's become a huge part of how I spend my time now, which I really enjoy.
So what drove you to do that? I mean, here you're a surgeon. I mean, I'll speak as a commoner. You know, you make good money. You're smart. Life is good. You're helping people. Why write a book and why do this?
It happened pretty organically over time. As a surgeon, I have the opportunity to work with students and residents, kind of people in their surgery training. And I'm also, in different settings, a leader of a team in the OR or on the ward in the hospital. And over time, what I found is I really enjoy the conversations. I enjoy teaching, like here's some technical skills that somebody needs to learn and working with them on that. But what was even more rewarding to me were these conversations that happened kind of after the fact or in between times that were about career decisions people were struggling with, or people would come back to me after having worked together for a while and then gone off and done other things. And they would give me a call of all people and say, I'm facing this decision, and that conversation we had a year or two ago was really helpful to me, and I'd like to bounce some ideas off you again. And those types of conversations started happening more and more, and I found them really rewarding. And the feedback I was getting is that they were helpful to the people I was talking to as well. And so over time, I just started to kind of deliberately set aside more and more of my time to do that sort of thing, which ultimately led to changing my surgery practice to a part-time practice and freeing up a bunch of time to do this sort of thing, have these sorts of conversations, because I think the ideas are really useful for people in business and in life.
Well, there's so much we can go into in this topic, but speaking for myself, I'm concerned for America these days in how people are making decisions. So many people see a headline or a soundbite or a TikTok or an Instagram and like, oh, that's truth. And I'm going to believe that. And not only am I going to believe that, I'm going to extrapolate it out. I'm going to exaggerate it out. And I mean, I don't know where to start, Fred. So where do you start? I mean, and I don't want to pick on Gen Z because I think this is widespread. And I think it's on people on the left and people on the right. And, I think it's all over. So.
Yeah. And I think, this we can go in a number of different ways at any point here. But I think one of the interesting things about the psychology of exactly what you're talking about is there's more and more evidence that when we hear something, we believe it. Just that's our default is I believe what I hear. And then when I have the time and the energy and put in conscious effort, I check to see whether I should believe it. And then maybe I adjust my beliefs or not. And so I think there's a decision right up front to kind of hold lightly to your own beliefs, I would say, if you haven't consciously examined them yet, because I think that's the beginning process of making a good decision would be having good information on what you're basing that decision. And if you're basing your decision only on what's in your own head and you haven't checked how that stuff got in there, you're going to have a tough time being successful over the long run.
Well, also, I mean, there's bias. So it's like on the voter fraud, potential voter fraud, whatever, in the 2020 election. I don't have a strong position on it, so I'm not making a political statement. What I do want to say is, there's been these claims of tens of thousands often that are wrong. I don't read the news very much at all. And I saw a headline that said, woman convicted of voter fraud. And I don't know where it was, Georgia or something like that. And I'm thinking, oh, wow, they nailed somebody. And it was one of those rare occasions where I clicked through, what's the story? Well, she'd been convicted of misrepresenting 4 people.
Right.
So, this whole, what you're talking about, the decision-making process, if I didn't click through and then look at it, instead of just click through and look at the headline again and say, oh yeah, this is terrible, there's been massive fraud. I could, if I was one of those people that was looking for fraud and blah, 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 based on my bias, I would have come to a conclusion that, at least based on that article, wasn't truth. It was just a small partial truth. How do you develop a habit? We're very much on habits. So any examples you got there? But it sounds like what you're saying is you got to do kind of a self-check instead of just buying into stuff.
Yeah, I definitely think that's true for information and for decision-making with the information that you've got. And I think that one of my big points, like one of the messages that I think needs to get out more widely, is that decision making is a skill, right? It's something you can learn, you can get better at. It's not like, well, sometimes I have trouble deciding even what socks to wear, so I'm just not good at that. I'm a person who can't do decision making well. And it's like, that's not true. Like, all of us make thousands of decisions every day. And as you're alluding to, you can develop habits that make you better at filtering the information, at deciding what's important to you, and then actually reaching a decision that you're confident enough in to act on. And to me, that's the key. It's, I think a number of your audience are entrepreneurs. These are people who really understand the idea of iterating, right? You try something, you see what works and what doesn't, you adjust your process, and you do that many times over time. And that's how you get to massive success, massive growth, big scale, all the things people are looking for in business these days. And that mindset can serve you well in your life if you're willing to run the experiment, right? If you're willing to try something new and then see what works and repeat it until it becomes a habit. And, I know you talk a lot about habits, and you've had great folks on, like, who was it? John Finn, right?
Oh, yeah.
Just recently, and talking about building habits and working with your habit loop and understanding how you build those things. And if you apply that to how you make big decisions and how you sort out which decisions are the big ones, you're going to get much better at it over time. And it becomes easier to do, faster, almost unconscious process. And you become much more efficient at identifying what are the big decisions and getting to the point where you can act on them.
Well, it sounds like what you're saying is that you have to develop a habit, a system for making these decisions. I'm curious, with the clients that come to you, or even people who are not clients that you've helped out, what is typically the trigger point where they realize, I'm not very good at making this type of decision?
Yeah, I would say the most common thing that I hear is people telling me they can't make decisions, which, as I was pointing out earlier, I think it's simply not true, but it gets that feeling because we have a bias to focus on the things that occupy a lot of our energy. And so what we don't realize is that we've made hundreds of decisions and acted on them through our day. But when we think back across the course of the day, what we remember are the 2 decisions we struggled with, not the hundreds that we just made and moved on. And then what is a really common theme for people is overwhelmed by so many decisions and not being able to sort through how to identify the big ones. And for me, I think that's a big point, is that most of us should spend a lot less time on most decisions and a lot more time on a few key decisions. And that often becomes a central piece of my work with people, and frankly with teams, to go into, like, I worked recently with the board of a nonprofit that's in education. And the big struggle was, these are intelligent, well-educated, well-meaning people who have jobs, who they're working in an education nonprofit. Most of them have school-age children. They're busy and they feel overwhelmed by their work on the board. And when we went in, I talk about an exercise in my book called the Pick 5 Things exercise. And there's this probably apocryphal story of Warren Buffett and where that all came from. But we did a version of that exercise with the board where it's just like, okay, tell me all the things that you guys are spending time on, that you're hung up on. What are you people struggling with? And at first, it starts out slow, but if you really make people sit down for 20 or 30 minutes and try to list out every project, every goal, everything, you start filling a few pages pretty quickly with that list. And then you hold that up and say, okay, which of these things, for this organization, they're a board. They've hired other people to do a lot of the work. It's like, which of these things are already other people's jobs to do? Okay. Do you trust the people you've hired? Okay. Then let them do their job and take that off your own list. Put a reminder to once a month, check in with the facilities director and make sure that, they're making progress on that, whatever. And then let's look at this list and see which of these things are in service to other things. So they're not actually separate things. They're just kind of sub goals under one big goal. And so you start narrowing the list that way, and that narrows it a little bit. And then what you got to do is tell people, okay, now you only get to pick 5 of these things. Which 5 things do actually matter? And for the board, it was pretty easy. It's like, we need to work on a strategic fundraising plan over the next few years. We need some facilities upgrades. And then we need to work on this specific program for kind of parent-student support. It's like, okay, those are the only 3 things. Get rid of the rest. Because if these are your top priorities, everything you do that's not on one of those 3 things is damaging your ability to do those 3 things. And getting clear like that, it takes a little bit of time. But once that's done, what's available for all the people on that board is just a massive amount of energy and attention to pour into the things that are actually the number one priority, the top 3 priorities for the organization. And that all of a sudden was like, oh, we're getting so much more done because instead of spending an hour talking about what to work on, we're spending that hour working on one of our top priorities. And we come to that hour energized because we got stuff done last time and we feel good about our work on the board. And so that just, snowballs from there of energy coming in, that energy being focused on the top priorities, progress being made. That gets more people excited and involved, and it goes from there. So I really think
it sounds like with the board members, instead of splitting their time between multiple priorities, when you narrow it down to 3 to 5, each person probably has one primary priority that they're really focused on. They're going to report back on, and some people may have some pieces of that. But overall, did it work out that one person was driving each one of those?
Yeah, one person or the subcommittees of the board got really clear on what to work on. And depending on the project, and I talk a lot about, you have these top level goals and then mid-level and low level goals. And a lot of those things on that first list, that's pages and pages of the things you're working on, supposedly, most of those are low level goals. They don't matter in and of themselves. You're only holding on to them because they're in service to one of your bigger goals. And once you realize that, once you get explicit about that, then it becomes a lot easier to let go of like, okay, we're struggling to get this low-level project done, but this low-level project doesn't matter if we have a different path to the top-level goal that we're really working towards. And so it becomes, you hear a lot about like know when to quit, like know when to drop projects that aren't, moving forward. That becomes a lot easier to do once you realize that the project isn't the goal in and of itself. The project is in service of a bigger goal. Now, if you have a better way to spend your time and energy towards your top level goal, like 5-year fundraising, if our little project on the website just is sucking up a lot of energy and not generating any donations, we can just let that go because we can spend that time and energy on other things like connecting with key donors or whatever it is for your business or organization that is going to move you towards the higher level goal.
Yeah,
because
but
you don't
let me
really
dive in
care
on
about
that.
the website.
Let me,
You just care about the next thing up.
yeah, I totally agree. Let me dive in on that though. Here I'm a person on the board, or one of your clients, and I have trouble making those decisions of paring back things. Okay, so then I have this deja vu moment, this whatever, where you help me, this like, whoa, yeah, this is what I need to do. But I still have that habit where whether it's those little things, kind of creepy crawly back into my schedule, or people give me new ideas and there's a new shining object that I want to chase after. How do you develop the habit for decisions where now I've got this focus, but I'm going to stay focused there? And I'm stronger at the little decisions that are going to enable me to stay focused here.
Yeah. So I think repetition, as you know, definitely helps with habit formation. And I think that one of the early habits to develop there is to check back in, to have done the exercise of defining what your big goals are. And the habit becomes consistently checking back in with, okay, we have a new list. And whether this is, as an individual, my daily plan or my weekly plan, what am I going to work on? The habit becomes referencing that to my top level goals. And if every time I decide, okay, these are the few things that are key tasks for me to get done today or this week, I never am going to do that without having right in front of me that list of the few things that I really care about in the big picture and the long term. And so that's a strong habit. And that's going to help me on a day-to-day basis align those little tasks with those big goals. And I think some of us are really good at getting stuff done, right? The day-to-day, I can make a task list and work my way through it. And man, do I get stuff done. And others are very good at the visionary, like, man, I can write a big mission statement and I'm going to change the world. And this is how my business is going to disrupt an industry. And very few of us are naturally good on both ends of that spectrum, right? We sit somewhere on there. And I think it's for each of us to be honest with ourselves about, okay, I'm really good at this part. The habit I need to develop is checking in with the other end of the spectrum. If I'm the visionary person, I'm really good at being creative, making big ideas, getting the kind of overarching mission statement for the business. I need to develop the habit of every day, I'm going to sit down and figure out what specific detail-oriented things I'm going to get done today. And then if you're on the other end of the spectrum, it's, yeah, I'm really good at getting those detailed things done, but I need to develop the habit of every day at the beginning of my day, when I make my list for the day, I'm going to check in with the big plan to remind myself that it's not just about getting things done, but that those things that get done are moving me towards the big goal.
Yeah, getting the right things done.
Yeah.
So, and the strategy, the strategic person, the visionary, is also, developing the discipline, decision-making capability to shun stuff that doesn't fit in with the vision. So there's not like multiple visions, type of thing. Now, I noticed at the beginning of your book, after the introduction, you have a chapter, you have no destiny, and that's a good thing. I thought that's an interesting way to start the conversation on decisions and what you want to talk about. So talk to us about that, because a lot of people, like, whether you call it a destiny or whether you call it a BHAG like Jim Collins, or whether you've got some goal that's a year, 5 years, 10 years, whatever it might be. Why do you want to clock somebody with that when they first start out?
Yeah, well, I think it's a pushback for me against a lot of, I think, well-meaning self-help, but that misses an important psychological principle. So I'll get specifically to the destiny thing in a minute, I promise, but I'm going to take one step back. And some people may be familiar with Carol Dweck's work, whether they know her name or not. She wrote the book Mindset and kind of popularized this idea from psychology research that there are fixed and growth mindset ways of looking at things. And in a fixed mindset, we believe that I'm either smart or dumb. I'm good at things or not good at them. Success is related to talent. And on the other end of that spectrum is the growth mindset, which is if I'm not good at something now, I can become good at it. Success is related to learning and growth. And there's a whole spectrum there, and all of us hold fixed or growth mindset ideas about ourselves in different areas of our lives in different times. But I think it's an important concept. And the other thing that psychology research has demonstrated is that our language, the language people speak to us in, and the language we use with ourselves pushes us towards either fixed or growth mindset. And the original research was with kids working on puzzles. And if you tell a kid, oh, you did that really quickly, you must be really smart, that's the fixed mindset thing. That kid interprets that as I am smart, not I worked hard or I did this well. And that kid in the next round of exercises will deliberately choose easy puzzles so that they're not at risk of being seen as not smart. Right? They're going to try to avoid any situation where they might fail and get this label redacted, so to speak. Whereas if you tell a kid, wow, you did that really quickly, you must have worked really hard on that. That pushes the kid towards a growth mindset, which is, hard work serves me. When that kid comes to the next round of the experiment, that kid deliberately is more likely to choose puzzles that they don't know how to do or that they're more likely to fail at. They choose harder things. And when you dig into it with additional research, they're choosing harder things because they see that as an opportunity to learn, right? As an opportunity to grow. And that type of research has been replicated across, industries and adults in all different settings. And the reason that I begin with that when I talk about destiny is a fixed mindset idea. This idea that there is a future out there for you, and it is a particular way, and you're either on track towards it or you're not. And one, I think that's an unfair dichotomy to stick people in. Like either you're on track towards a future that you can't change, that's kind of predetermined, or you've failed to find the path. I don't think those are the two options available for us. I think the option is there are lots of paths out there. You can choose one. And if you don't like it, you can change paths or you can start making your own. And that's not destiny. And I think, you can get into semantics, but I think it's the important concept there is that if you're sitting around waiting, like you can't journal your way to success. And, I keep a journal. I think it's a very useful thing, but you can't find your passion or identify your future path just by sitting and introspecting. It's an important step, but at some point you have to take action in the world. You have to take a step. And in doing so, it doesn't have to be quite as scary as it often gets portrayed, because if you don't like where that step takes you, you can change direction. And that, I think, is a big point for me that's different than the idea of finding your destiny, of identifying the one true path for yourself. I think it's much more creative and open than that.
You kind of opened a proverbial Pandora's box with that one. That's where it's such a small nuance in the verbiage, in the feedback that's given to the person. Both are compliments, both could be sincere, but one sets a mindset that creates fear, and one sets a mindset that's comfortable with a level of mistakes or failure or difficulty, yet to continue to plow through. And we probably shouldn't go there. But I mean, nobody has to get trained on how to be a parent, right? You just reach an age where you can create kids and then you can become a parent. No training at all, except for what we get instinctively from ours. And ours are all wounded people. And now we're wounded people and we're making a mistake. Anyway, so let me shift gears. I'm sorry I went down that rabbit trail, but it is a very deep thing you're talking about. And first of all, I like to say recently, me, you, us. So first of all, I need to learn how to make better decisions and how to talk to myself in a healthy way. Then I can mentor somebody else and bring them along better, which is what you're doing, which then creates this positive us,
Right.
that can work together. But let's go back to how we make decisions. So we talked earlier on how a lot of people, you said, you started out that for most people, or many people, I think it was most, are inclined to accept something as true when it's said to them. Okay. I'm not sure even the question, how do we help people understand that's a problem? And you need to not become a skeptic where you're negative and doubting everything, but you also need to put a little pause there, I think is the term you said. How do we get people to understand that and start working on that habit?
Yeah, I think that's a more than $1 million question. That's a society changing question. I can take a stab at it, which I think part of it is engaging in the conversation. So as you're saying, first acknowledging that even knowing that that's true doesn't change it for me, right? I spend a lot of time thinking and reading and studying about this and helping other people with it. That doesn't exempt me from having the same psychological effect, from making the same error myself. And so admitting that that's true for me then can give me a little bit of kind of empathy and ability to identify with somebody who maybe I just horribly disagree with. And my tendency is going to be to judge them for believing this ridiculous information that they're basing their whatever claim on. And you could be on any area of the political compass or social whatever. And I think for me, the habit, to come back to that again, has become curiosity. So if I want to help somebody understand something better, I need to not tell them how they, air quotes here on audio, but I need to not tell them how I think they should understand it. I need to ask, the habit is to ask them how they came to understand it the way they do. And what happens when we get asked a question like that, if you ask me, why do you believe what you believe about this political issue? I'm going to tell you a story. And in telling you that story, I start to recognize that I based my belief on something. Not just that my belief is true, but that it's based on things. And as soon as I start to think about that, I'm a little more open to conversation about what my belief is based on.
Yeah.
And so it's not so much attacking the thing itself, it's getting people to acknowledge that it came from somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's beautiful. And it's, it stops us from what you mentioned, the instant negative judgment where I'm right, you're wrong. And again, based on partial information, there's a guy, Greg Kokel, and he talks about using the Columbo questions. So he says, the first question you ask, he says, well, what exactly does that mean when you think they've said something that's wrong? And so they say that, and then he says, well, why do you believe that's true? So, which is your question. And then he may just plant a seed. But what he says, he likes to put a pebble in their shoe. So it bugs them and they'll think about it. But he's not trying to get an argument. He's not trying to push his opinion, whatever. He's just like, whatever it might be. But I think that's a great thing to keep in mind for people. Is that might be a great starting point. It sounds like what you're recommending is don't make those instant decisions that something's true that you hear. And whether you're asking questions of a person or you're thinking, I guess I need to think about that or look into that. I had somebody say that to me last week, where they told me something and they said, hey, this is awesome, a health thing to do. And I said, oh, that sounds interesting. I need to look into that.
Right. Yeah. And I think, I think having little phrases like that for ourselves, you're asking about, okay, what can we do to create a habit of checking? answering advice with, I need to look into that, or a phrase like that would be a good habit for each of us to say, this thing was recommended to me. And instead of, ooh, I'm going to try that, I'm going to think, ooh, I'm going to look into that. And that's going to shift my mindset just a little bit towards questioning the utility or the truth of what has been recommended to me, rather than just accepting it and saying I should try that on myself.
Yeah, and particularly in the social media environment we're in now, where so much is being sold based on sound bites and skill and creativity to make a point that sounds so convincing. And then somebody else picks up on it and says, oh, you got to do this, blah, 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 and you just say, oh, that sounds interesting, and get into a dialogue about it. I'm particularly, now, I could talk to you for like 4 more hours, easy. This is like easy stuff. But what I'd like to do is I'd like to end here, and I want to encourage the audience again to consider your book, Better Than Destiny, Practical Science for Creating the Life You Want. But also, if they want to learn more about the work you're doing, where would they go? What website?
Yeah, come to my website. It's frederickbahnson.com. And there's some free resources from the book on there. There's a mindset quiz that people can take to look at where they fit in fixed and growth mindset about a couple of different things, which can be fun. And people can contact me directly through the website. I'm also on LinkedIn and Instagram, but honestly, I love the conversations. So I love it for people to reach out and get in touch directly.
Cool. I think it's really great. I want to encourage people to really think about it. So if your business is stuck, if you've got difficult decisions to make, I mean, here's an expert you can talk to and something to consider. But Fred, really, thank you very much for being on the show. I appreciate it.
I appreciate your time, David. This is really fun. Enjoyed the conversation.